I think I want to speak just a little. I want to speak a bit about like how I use artistic, archiving of artistic research. But I also think I just want to, as the political scientist that I am, speak a little bit about the potential of archiving and why it's important. We don't start with the book burnings. We start a bit up, but I can just operate that. That's fine.
Wait. But it's a PDF.
So just to say that my name is Alex. I work with dance. I also work within something that I am trying to develop as a field that I call somatic activism, and I think it really emanates from the idea that the body is an archive, and we say that because then we can alert to memory and sensations, but it's also very much an archive of stress, tension, and trauma. And simultaneously with taking this education in choreography, I also did a certification in something called trauma release exercises. The whole point is that in our myofascial tissue, muscles, we keep a lot of tension that unless it's released, it will keep on being in your body, informing whatever kind of choice making you can do with your body. And I think I came to dance very much through the idea that it was all about intentional movement. And the more that I'm studying it, I'm realizing it's actually a lot of involuntary movement. Like there's a lot of what can your body hold and release and sustain when it's that tense. I speak about archiving and archiving artistic work within a context of erasure and genocide. I think no one can speak about archiving outside a context of genocide and erasure. And I think it's because I speak about practice that has been delivered from body to body. And so I think some of the questions that we need to also be busy with is how does a practice such as Dabke, for instance, survive the massive and systematic slaughter of Palestinians by the Israeli occupation? But I also ask it because simultaneously with this one genocide of the Palestinian people, there are simultaneous genocides, and I very much have grown up in the wake of the erasure of gender disobedient or queer or trans or whatever you want to name it. There's a cultural heritage which was completely eradicated. And so when I try to make dances, I also try to fill up some gaps that was left empty, meaning that I have tried to make meaning happen within my work, realizing that that meaning gap was installed there by violent policies. And I think erasure is a really beautiful notion to think about also now that we are invoking fire and we're invoking the burning of an archive, because there's a continuous practice of erasure just as much as there's a continuous practice of archiving. So we are not doing this work outside of a context of erasure. And I will speak a little bit about that later. Maybe we can make the agreement that you also notify me when there are 5 minutes left, right? Yeah, that would be nice. Cute. So I take the cue of archive from this text by Derrida, Archive Fever. I saw that there were other etymologies proposed in this one, but the etymology that Derrida derives from is the Greek word archeion, which he interprets to meaning the master's house, that place of power that centralizes observation of phenomena, be it weather, demography, health, war, power, whatever. And I think it's important for us to understand that an archive is also always a source of power because it creates another kind of literacy. Maybe if we are going into more archivally turned practices, you need to be able to access archives and read archives and find gaps in the archives in order to properly legitimize your practice. So there's always this gap of like we're narrowing down and excluding people whenever we try to focus our efforts on something. So let's keep that in mind. Also because we're famously reminded by Audre Lorde that the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. So there's something about if the archive is the master's house and we archive as the masters would, we are just reproducing power. And I assume that the majority of us are not interested in dancing for reproduction of exclusion, but maybe for liberatory purposes, for fun, for cute things. So I have been very busy with practice rather than pieces. and I think I've made pieces through practices, but that was only because I was asked to do it and because that's how this economy works. One practice that I have been busy developing is a practice that I call body hiking. I stole it from Sophia Mage and then turned it on its head. And body hiking is a little bit like playing the floor is made of lava, where one person is not allowed to touch the ground and the other one will then serve as the ground. So body hiking is a practice where the landscape or the bottom or whatever we will call this body serves as a terraforming landscape, let's say like a planet that might be distressed or a landscape that might be traumatized. And we have a hiker who in a precarious way is trying to make their way through the stage. I started thinking originally about it as a metaphor for the Anthropocene. If we are only living in humanly driven landscapes, what is there really to hike on, was one of my questions. And it involves really quite precarious work because there's weight on joints that we, as young bodies, wish we would have protected better so that we could sustain. But the potential for risk and also the audience involvement of pain, I was thinking a lot of this sensuous turn has been a lot about softness and tenderness and these things. And I was very fascinated with the idea that the word in Danish actually could mean both sore and tender in English. So risk and pain and the potential for harm and violence as an approximation between bodies was something that I was quite fascinated with. I was also very fascinated with theories of agency, where very often we think about people having it or not. Theories of oppression and power, where either you are oppressed or you are the oppressor. Very binary readings. And I think as a queer theoretician, I often think like whenever things are binary, they're false, so I'll have to see what else there's there. Here, the reading was very often that there's a body that's passive and a body that's active. And I can tell you from bottoming, you know that you really need to do a lot of work in order to receive, to redirect weight, to create conditions for movement. So these pictures are documentation of a piece I did called Edging the Ground Like the Skin of a Lover. It's the second piece I made with body hiking. And when I developed it, I realized I really can't make this work unless I develop a toolkit around consent and boundary work. When we started developing the practice, we could sustain body hiking for, let's say, 2 minutes, because it's that tough. The piece is 40 minutes, so there was something of like building up the body archive into a position where it could work with the tension and the conditions that I wanted to work with. And so these are some of the dances, registrations of risk zones and sensitivities depending on the day of our rehearsal. So they would change every day. We would do different body scans after the body work, realizing what were pathways that were possible. And as I said, this was the second piece I did. This was how we developed it. This is from a school piece that I called Endlings. There's a lot of this like embodied knowledge of like how do you flex a foot to protect a knee joint when stood upon? What kind of tension do you put actually into your fingers if you are interested in not having your palm completely crash? Which I gave up trying to describe because it is really a relational knowledge. Like with Ming Ro, I feel like even if it's been 3 years since we did this piece, we could lie down, we could enter it in our relational matrix. But if I invited Kit to do it with me, we'd have to have a long series of rehearsals to reactivate that kind of trust bond. Because really the material is not a score, it's a relation. And so that made it choreography for me, because I think choreography is not necessarily a score or the performance of a score, but really is a theory of bodies. The reason why I make choreography is that I want to visualize or materialize that our bodies could be in space in a different manner. So there's something of imagining a possibility, if only for a limited time frame. And I think that becomes very, like here you see this is from Endlings, this is like this is basically the piece. It begins here and it ends here. This is a process note for me. So like that's just for what I wanted to show the audience. what body hacking really is about is an idea about gravity, an idea about being in relation, an idea about how are you moving and finding agency under duress and pressure. So I am a political scientist and I write a lot about my work. And so this is a thesis that I wrote on the basis of body hacking, where I studied black scholars. Are you nodding because it's 5 minutes? Yeah, great. No? Yeah? Nice. Black scholars' notions of white gravity and anti-gravity. This thing of like, I don't know if you are familiar with, for instance, the language of voguing, but there is this idea that there is such a very dramatic move called the death drop, which you have this da 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 da, and then a body falls to the ground. It's not called a death drop in the community, but the assumption of dropping dead is something that we would very often see black queer bodies do. So therefore this is like a cultural term that has been put on what we know as the dip. So that would be like a kind of gravity that pressures you into the ground because we expect you to lose your access to breath. And that became very present whenever I would show body hacking to people, because they would also have notifications about what is this gravity that's happening, who is the person that you have sympathy with as they move through this. So I said that there's this thing about, I'll just maybe go to the, yeah, so I write, every time I do a piece, I always make sure that there's a thesis about it. Often a very long thesis, so that I make sure that whatever the curiosity is embedded in other curiosities. This work that I did with Katrine Graup-Elbo, a composer and a violinist here in Denmark, explored a methodology of sistering, something which we thought of could be a way of being in relation through the current anti-trans and anti-feminist backlash on our bodies. And so we wrote a little leaflet that we called Sistering, a methodology for staying in relation. And that also became a way of actualizing our archive, because we would sell this and donate money from the proceeds to fundraisers for trans healthcare. And I think that's just to say that this is the leaflet, Sistering. I think I want to put that there because again, like, why do we archive? I think many of you might be familiar with this quite iconic photo of the Nazi book burnings. A very important contextual descriptor of this book burning is that this is the archive of Magnus Hirschfeld, who was the director of the Institut für Sexualforschung in Berlin, which was, and I can't use other words, but was really the Alexandria library for gender and gender non-conforming history. There were 20,000 books in that archive, and it was the first archive to be destroyed by the Nazi when they grabbed power in 1933. So whenever I am confronted with this idea that transness or gender nonconformity is a new thing that is now in vogue, it is because my entire history was erased and I've had to live in the aftermath of that. I'll just take 2 minutes to say why that is important to put in here. Because archives are endangered and they can be lit and they can be destroyed, and I think quite a lot of people are out there trying to eradicate certain archives more than other archives. In my new work, I'm trying to understand what does it mean to take a dead archive and fabulate into it. And I'm very inspired by Saidiya Hartman and her practice of critical fabulation. She is busy with the big gap in the archive that occurred with enslavement and the Middle Passage. But I think as we are speaking about simultaneous and multiple genocides, it's possible to critically fabulate into multiple gaps in our knowledge. Maybe we don't have to fill it in, but we can feel it. And I think that's something that I'm trying to do currently. The reason why this is so important for me is that amongst these files were the surgery records of Lili Elbe, a Danish trans woman, the first woman to actually receive gender-confirming surgery. Here she is, beautiful. Here she is depicted by her wife, Gerda Wiener. Here she is depicted by Eddie Redmayne in the Hollywood movie The Danish Girl. there's something about trying to understand and bring back a history that has been erased, because the implications of it remaining erased are unbearable. And so I think things that archive does to me is that, this is new work that I'm busy with, it makes it possible for me to wonder, what if she survived these facial surgeries? What if her records were never burned? What if this archive in Berlin was never eradicated? What kind of world could we have lived in? And that gives possibility to the artistic vision that can then come on board in the stage. It was a lot of directions. I just want to say this is the kind of field where archiving becomes interesting. I'm not making archives for you all. I think I'm very busy making archives for me and my kin, because I see that me and my kin are disappearing. I'm wearing the trousers of a choreographer who was here 3 months ago, and now she's not here anymore. So it's also like this erasure is not just happening out there elsewhere, it's also happening here. And I think that makes it pertinent, but it also makes it joyful, because in every little act of writing down a note, there is an idea of a future where someone else might read it and might find a little bit of leisure and ease that I didn't have when I was starting to do this work. So I think I just want to leave you with that. Yeah, and